Welcome to Flight Path, a brand new podcast from Tern's R&D exec team. Each week, we invite you into the cockpit for an insider's look at our latest launches, current projects, and upcoming innovations. We're so excited to have you on this journey, so let's dive in. Welcome back to the Flight Path podcast, everybody. We are so excited. We're going on episode 3 now, which I think officially makes Brad, Molly, and I professional podcasters. I think we can start to say that now. We've got a full episode today. We've got a ton to talk about. Super excited about it. Before we jump in, because we're professional podcasters now, I know to say, please subscribe to the podcast. You can get it at most places that you listen to podcasts, if those places are YouTube or Spotify. And so subscribe there and let us know what you think. I know a few people in the YouTube comments have asked for RSS feed links. We're working on that, so stay tuned. And then the other piece of news right off the bat here is that we are already in full swing for our next major product webinar, which is on August 7th at 3 p.m. This one is going to be really focused on all the incredible improvements that we've made on just the day-to-day advisor workflow. So it's going to be a great fit for everybody. Even if you're an agency owner that just tuned into the last webinar, this is going to be a great fit for you. So make sure to register, and we'll put a link to do so in the show notes. With that, Brad, Molly, how are we doing? How was the week?
I'm doing great. I'm back from San Francisco, back in my own house, like chill again. And then also just like the week at work has been a lot of fun. Like we've been in like sprint mode, getting a lot of agency features out, and finally had a chance to kind of like lift our heads up and look at some of the feedback we've been getting over the past couple of weeks and months, and like finally got to tackle some really fun and like little like small details on the design side that we kind of just hadn't prioritized with some of these bigger features. So it's been a cool week getting a lot of stuff done, and yeah, excited to talk more about that here in a minute.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I spent basically all day Monday in our feedback tool where advisors can upvote their favorite or like their most important requests, and I love it. I'm in love with it. I was like the internal skeptic of us moving to that tool initially, but it's amazing. So plug for that if you want to submit feedback on your top bar. Under help, you can submit feedback and upvote things, and we're really looking at that feedback. So that was just a blast. And then it really kind of gave me a kick in the butt to also just get these things ready for engineering. So worked really closely with Brad, and we'll talk about what some of those things are. But there's nothing like seeing 50 people desperately need e-signatures to really make sure that we're getting that in this week. So yeah, thanks to the people who submit feedback. You really made my week, and we'll talk about that stuff in more detail in a little bit.
Yeah, that was stuff Slack. Yeah, it's like a fun Slack message I saw from Molly. It's just like, I love Candy. And I'm like, okay, like this is good. I'm very excited to see that. I had a good week. I can't help. It sounds like both of you were just tremendously productive, and I can't help but take that a little personally because I've been largely out. I was driving back from the UP on Monday, and then on what was you say? I guess like this kind of Thursday, Friday, I've been at a family reunion, and so this is something we've been doing for quite a while. So that's been nice. But it was a good week, despite it not being the most productive work week for me. But it's been fun, kind of spending time with the fam. But excited to kind of catch up. This is also helpful for me as we kind of talk about this. Tell me, maybe Molly, like you kind of were talking about getting some of these things ready for engineering, some of these kind of little feedback items, like what does that mean? Like, what are those features? Like, would love to just hear more about that.
Yeah, so every single week we try to do a number of things that are not the big features, but matter a lot to our users. And oftentimes there are things that, we get a request and we can easily slot it in, and there's not a lot of work needed from myself or Brad. It's just kind of obvious what we need to do to make the change. For other things, there actually has to be a lot of product and design thinking to really get it right and make sure that we're addressing the feedback in a way that's going to benefit all of our users. And so there was this like big set of things that had been a little bit on the back burner for a while that required that level of product and design thinking, and we were just so heads down on some of these bigger features. So we spent a lot of our week on those things. You should have seen phone number on credit card authorization. So whenever you pull up credit card details, it will include a phone number from the client that shipped as of this morning. So that's really cool to see. We also worked a lot on e-signatures on forms. So spoiler alert, for our podcasters, our loyal podcasters, that should be shipping either today or early next week, which is really, really exciting. It will definitely be in my product update next week. Um, what else did we do? We did, oh, this was a big one. We witnessed so much pain when people are adjusting itinerary dates and they had like spent all this time making the activities on like the correct date and stuff. And then the only options were move everything to the first day or remove components and like yikes. So now when you adjust dates, you can like move it to the equivalent day on the new set of dates. So if it's like on the second day of the trip, it'll be on the second day of the trip still. That's huge. Um, so yeah, e-signatures. Oh, last one that has shipped is preserving pagination when you navigate back from library items. It like seems like such a small thing, but when you go to like page 2 of your email templates, just as one example, and then you click back, it would take you to page 1, and it just really frustrated people. And so we fixed that this week as well. So some of these, again, just like maybe not even small from the engineering side, but not these like major features, just that really add up and improve people's lives a lot when we ship them. And then we also spend a bunch of time on things that that you won't see yet, but are going to be coming in the next few weeks. So maybe I'll let Brad go into a little bit more detail for those things, hiding prices, per night per room, digging into dates. I'll kind of toss it over to you to talk about those.
Amazing. Yeah, and my favorite one of the ones we shipped this week is the like going back to the right page of the search results when you go to another page. It's one of those things you just assume works.
Yeah.
Even on the design side, it's not something I like write down when I'm designing, like, oh yes, this must work like the internet, like we expect it to. But it's just a thing that like depending on how you build it, it might not work out that way, and you have to spend a little bit extra time getting those details right. So super excited to have that one out there. That used to frustrate me when testing. So glad to see we got that one fixed. As we look forward, yeah, the things we're planning now to get ready to build in the near future. We won't give a specific date just because things can always change. But one of the top requests we've heard from folks who are doing more kind of like using the itinerary more as like a proposal in turn, like really trying to sell a trip. Your client's not locked in yet. Often are asking like, wait, why do I have to have the price as the first thing my clients see? And like trying to show them how incredible this trip's going to be, but instead the first thing they focus on is this potentially very large number. And then on the same kind of along the same vein, it's like still there even when you're traveling. So you're trying to have a great time on your trip. Every time you look at your itinerary, you're reminded of like, oh right, I spent this much money on this trip. So we're gonna make that optional, so you can choose to hide the pricing details at any point in time on a trip. If you've used the ability to hide kind of the price on individual items and just show the top level thing, because we're just going to add on to that and allow you to hide everything. So that should be coming soon, and excited about that one. And of course, if there's more feedback, we'll continue to adjust. But I think that'll solve a lot of problems for people who are running into this pricing question. The other thing we've been working on in the pricing realm, we'll say, is for lodging. Well, mostly for lodging. Right now, you can have a per night price per room or per person, and that's all you can have. So if you're putting in a per person price, you have to calculate that per night. And same thing if you're doing a price per room, you have to do that per night. We know that's not how many experiences are actually quoted, and so we're going to allow you to adjust that. So you could do something per night if you need to quote it as a specific number per night, but we'll also allow you to just do in total. So total per person or total per room. And again, that should be hopefully coming soonish. And then that's all we have on the pricing side for now. But the last piece we're starting to dig into, that's actually a lot more complicated than it sounds, is allowing for more kind of localization when it comes to dates. And so what that means is when you're typing in a date, right now in Tern, in most places, we have you type in the year, the month, and then the day. We recognize that, well, at least for me in the US, that's not the way I normally think about dates. I'm a month, day, year person. We know that in Canada, there can be some differences, and also in the UK. And we see people in our feedback tool, Canny, requesting lots of different variations of this and asking for customization. And what we really think is going on there is that's because they have regional preferences that we can understand just by understanding where their device is, like what the location settings are on their device. So we're starting to dig into that and make it so that whatever you're used to doing for dates should hopefully be the date format that shows up in Tern without you needing to go and customize things or like set up any additional configuration. So that's a fun one to dig into on the design side. It makes designing a little more complicated when you have to be thinking about all of the different ways people want to see dates and all of the mocks. But again, really important for people, especially when you're trying to save time in Tern, to not have to think about how you should type in a date, but be able to just put it in the way you're used to thinking about it. Anything I missed there, Molly? Anything to add on?
Well, no, I was just gonna say it's like a internal joke that our teammate Erin, that I'm sure a lot of advisors tuning in know Erin. She is a travel advisor. One of her like first weeks, she sat me down. She was like, "Molly, per night per room. What? This does not make sense." So like, she's gonna do a happy dance when we fix this in particular. This will be a top one for her. So.
I I'll add to, I think like that. I mean, there's so many cool things that I get excited about. Like the credit card authorization, adding phone number. It's like one of those like simple things that we know every time you do. I think Disney is the one that comes up a lot. It's like you have to have a phone number every time you're putting your credit card in. And so just being able to add and make that easy is super exciting. And then the dates one I think is, I'll add to like, and plus plus kind of what Brad was saying, just in terms of like the how unique dates are and how I never appreciated how ingrained the date format that we use in the US was until I actually lived in the UK, and the date format was totally different. And like every time I wrote the date one way, they would be like, is this April 6th or June 4th? Like, I don't know what you're actually saying here, right? And it's like really it can be quite confusing. And kind of the funny background story here is we've got an engineering team that's kind of remote, and one of our engineers in Uruguay, and he was like building the date picker, right? And like used the format in Uruguay to build the dates, and it just like stuck and permeated kind of across Tern. And so now it's like totally normal. Like he looks at the dates, it's like totally this is the format that we use. And if you're in the US, you're like, this is not the format that we use. And if you're in Canada, you're like, we use a third format that is quite different. And the same with the UK. So the easy answer would have just been like, well, we're going to standardize on one format. But then it's kind of cool. Like Tern's already quite global in terms of our user base. And so that would have just alienated and made angry a different group of users. So we really said we got to figure out how to make this localized and take the same data and translate it into the format that's like regional. So that's it's going to be such a big impact and kind of a fun first step towards like broader kind of localization support. So this will be it'll be a fun project for a lot of reasons, if not maybe larger than we would have thought it would be when we're like, oh, just change the date format, right? So maybe one other question, and Malba, maybe I'll throw this to you. Like e-signatures on forms, like e-signatures take it's not just as simple as like putting a text box in and having somebody type the right. Like, can you just like bring to life a little bit like what do we mean by an e-signature on a form, and like how does an e-signature differ from like a text box, and like how do we think about that?
Yeah, so for e-signatures, first, just in forms in general, there's a lot of different ways that we have to render these components. So, like, you actually have the element on the form itself that you drag in and how that looks when the advisor is actually configuring the form. You have when they send out the form, like, how do people actually fill it out? You have the preview for the advisor. How does it look when they're in preview mode, but they can't actually submit things? You have the share experience for forms. So, like, when you're getting a shared form, what does that look like? So actually anything we change in forms, it's more work than meets the eye. I'll start with that. And then the other thing just to keep in mind is that a signature is more of a kind of legally important thing. And so it's more like a terms and conditions where we already store like IP address when people submit form responses, but we need to make sure that we have a kind of structured understanding of when someone signs the form. We're not going to block the initial release of e-signatures on this, but as a part of this project before we move on, we will actually have a PDF receipt now of every form response, regardless of it if it has an e-signature, but we're doing it because of e-signatures. so that when you get a form response as an advisor, not only can you see the e-signature in the response itself when you log in, but right there in your email, it's the PDF receipt. So you have that hard copy that, if you're using the form to provide additional legal coverage or what have you, you just always have that like sitting in your inbox with the PDF as that kind of formal receipt.
And one question there, just because you use kind of a term that we use internally all the time, but that, for folks that are less familiar with the product development, this idea of blocking the release on, the PDF.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of unpack, like, how do we think about, we're going to ship e-signatures on forms and we're not going to block the release on this, but then like there's this other thing coming. Can you just kind of like
Yeah.
maybe generalize that thought process and like what we actually mean when you hear us say things like that?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So like at Tern, our mentality is always like whatever we can do to provide value as quickly as possible to advisors, we should do. So if there's a multifaceted feature, but the very first part of it on its own will increase the value of Tern and make it easier to use Tern or address an important gap, we will release that part of the feature before the rest of the things are ready. And that's not just like a straightforward, oh, we always do that, because you also have to consider by releasing it with just this piece, are we going to make our lives harder for us later to ship the rest of it? Is there going to be something about it that's missing that actually makes life more difficult for advisors? And so this came up with this particular feature because one thing I was worried about if we didn't have the PDF receipt ready when we released the e-signature was that advisors would actually start to collect e-signatures, not have the PDF receipt, and then have to like feel the need to go back to their clients to get them to like re-sign the form. But through that conversation, we realized that retroactively the PDFs could be available for download. So we're not going to like resend the email with the PDF, but you could always go into the product and just download from the response itself the PDF version of the e-signature. So that coming to that conclusion, which Brad pointed out when we were having this discussion, made us realize that, hey, we can start to launch e-signature, allow advisors to start collecting this because the PDF is actually a bigger piece of the project. It's going to be a bit gnarly given like all the things we have to render in the PDF. So we can start adding value today or Monday, whenever we're able to ship it, and then spend another few days on the PDF component, launch that, and then it won't be missing for any of those responses that you collected in the meantime. So that's kind of a little bit of an inside look into our thought process with some of these things.
And I think it's so important to talk about in this context too, because like people, if we shipped that without kind of sharing our way of thinking, and this is I think quite different than other companies in the travel space, like we'd get tickets, right? And it would be like, people would be like, oh, like they didn't think about PDF. It's like, no, we thought about it. We just thought that it was better to give you the options. You could start playing with e-signatures, get comfortable with it, and then be able to know that you'll not only have the PDFs for every form in the future, but that'll be kind of retroactively available. I love that. Maybe moving on. I'm just looking through here and making sure the maybe like kind of transition because we shipped something else that's like pretty big in the Tern world. We've actually been talking about this since our first podcast, I think, and that is FlightLegs and lodging having the ability to check in, check out dates have now launched. Brad, for those maybe that are tuning in for the first time, can you give just a quick overview of like what this feature is, a little bit of the history behind it, and maybe any of the learnings that we've had as we kind of built it out?
For sure. Yeah, so when we say flight legs, really what we're talking about is a way to take all of the flights that are really on one itinerary, or really what you might think about as one booking. Like if you have round trip tickets, you think about kind of adding all those flights in one flow. It's just like, oh yeah, here's, flight number one, two, and you go through the whole list and you add them in one place. But in turn, that also meant that they got shown on the itinerary as one item. And so if you add, four flights, like two flights out and two flights back or something, those didn't show up on the correct day on the itinerary. So if you did it, if you wanted to do that, you have to go like actually add different flights, and the flow is a little bit clunkier. And so what we've actually done is made it so you can toggle it to show the flights on the right day if that's what you want to do. So if you want to make sure that each flight that is in one flight booking effectively shows up separately on the itinerary. Now you can do that, which allows you to one make sure that it's showing up when a client's looking at their individual itinerary. They see on their specific day, all right, I fly out this morning at this time. Then I have to go back to like their flight reservation item on the itinerary and figure out which day that corresponds to. And then it also allows you to put things between flights. Like if you have a long layover, technically it's still on the same day, but if you're like, oh, you all should take a trip into the city, like between, your flight. I don't know, like my partner and I went to Singapore. It's like we went into Singapore, went into the city for a while, and then continued on our journey. But like we'd love to have that time available in the itinerary between those two flights. So now you can put things between the flight legs and make all that work. And like David mentioned, this was like my first project week one. We joked about me like not being officially onboarded as part of the team until it's out. So it's finally out there. It required a lot of re-architecting and a lot of changes behind the scenes, but we're really excited to have it out. And we've also already made some adjustments to the lodging and checkout pieces. Like we did a similar thing for lodging, and we learned from that very quickly and made some tweaks. So I think Molly, were you going to talk a little bit about the tweak we made there on the lodging side?
Yeah. And this is like part of our philosophy about shipping quickly is also just there's no better way to get things right and learn about what the right experience is than to get things out there because people do things that, even though we do a lot of research, are unexpected. Like don't occur to us at first. So we just really have to learn and listen once we release things. And the unexpected thing that people did when we launched the ability to separate out lodging checkout on your itinerary board was they started to rename the main event check-in. And this created a few different pieces of confusion. First, for things like credit card authorization, it's a bit odd or like pricing to see on your pricing tab, like check-in at hotel costs me $500. Like, no, it's the hotel that costs you $500. The check-in is really the itinerary piece. The other thing that made it confusing was when you actually clicked in to the checkout part of the itinerary, when you opened the full event would say check in to hotel. So it's like, a little bit weird, a little funky. So what we did was we actually introduced the ability to name the check-in part of the itinerary and the checkout part of the itinerary. So now on your itinerary board, you can have, check in at hotel on Monday, check out from hotel on Thursday. But when you open the main event to learn more in pricing and credit card authorization, it can just be, stay at the hotel. So that was actually a harder change than you would imagine just with some of the architecture and all the different places we had to update it. But we'll go a really long way to make this more intuitive. We were able to also apply those learnings at the same time to flight legs. So now on the itinerary board, you'll see each flight leg named that way. But then again, when you open it up, you'll see, flights from with all the flights in the title. So yeah, constant iteration on the things that we don't get quite right when we first ship.
And I think this project is just to kind of bring to life how big it is. I mean, historically at Tern, and if you're not a Tern user, we've got this board view. And everything is you drag a lodging item onto the board, you drag a flight onto the board, you drag an activity onto the board, and you can kind of change the layout, you put it on a day. And basically, we render that exact content on the client's itinerary, right? So if the first thing on the board is lodging, the first thing that shows up on the itinerary is lodging. And this really required us to actually say we have a single item on the board that is driving potentially many different parts of the itinerary. And that really, to the point that Molly and Brad just made, forced us to think through, well, when you click on that item can be actually showing different contexts. And so how do we make that context clear? And that's exactly what we heard here with FlightLegs and with like the check-in versus check-out. So this was a really kind of big project. And it's another one of those that we've been getting asked for literally since we shipped flights. And I think people are like, maybe a little bit of like, why don't you just do this? Like, it seems easy, like just show the flights where they are. And it's like, well, yeah, but if we show the flights where they are, like what happens when you try and drag one of those flight legs that's controlled by this kind of parent activity onto different days? And should we let you do that? And this was like edge case galore, right? With all these little things. And so it does not. I don't think it surprised any of us that we learned something after we shipped it that we're like, yep, okay, there's a little detail that we didn't quite think about. But I think it's actually like just a testament to the work that Brad and Molly and the entire engineering team did. That like that's what we learned. Just right that there's a little confusion in the title, and actually we fundamentally rethought what it means to have an item on the board and how that shows up on the itinerary. So pretty fun project to have live, and I think a lot of people really love that kind of flexibility.
Maybe one thing to add, just to make it more clear how important my job is and how hard this is to it's not just the client itinerary. Like it's on the board in one place, right? On the client side, you've got the overview tab, which is like the image heavy version of the itinerary, which it shows up there. Shows up on the itinerary overview tab as well. Then we have the iOS app, the Android app, a PDF download. So it's not just like, oh yeah, make it the change here and it shows up in this one place. You have to like design each of those places and then actually build them all. So it's complicated. Like it is
It's,
harder behind the scenes than I think what people see kind of at that surface level when they make the request.
And David,
well, and
I know you mentioned this, but the reason Brad is just so defensive about this feature is it really was when he first joined Tern, it was his onboarding feature that like he designed, and it's only now getting into the product, and so we all get to tease him that he hasn't been an official employee up till now. So you can
yeah,
hear the
yeah,
passion in his voice as to why that was the case.
You can't
that's
say I'm
right.
not
Yeah.
patient. I waited quite a while.
Well, also, I love that this is like, here's a good warm up. We just talked about, like, spent 10 minutes talking about how hard this feature was and how many screens there were and all the things. Like, here's a good warm up project for you, Brad. Like, why
Yeah.
don't you figure out this?
Day one.
Yeah. Welcome to Turn. This is truly a look into behind the curtain here, where it's like that's how we trial by fire. Um, okay, I want to zoom out. I know we're getting close to the kind of 30-ish minutes that we target here. People that may be listening could, I think, may be curious, just on like what does the rest of the year look like for Turn? Which it kind of feels funny to even tee it up that way because in a startup moving this quickly, it's hard to know exactly what next month will look like. Even sitting here in end of July, knowing what August will look like in detail, but maybe like Molly, if we kind of zoom out a little bit, like what kind of themes are you thinking about for the second half here of 2024?
Yeah. So if we look forward to next month to August, there's really kind of like two main themes. The first is closing out a lot of the really critical foundational agency features. So if you caught our agency webinar, you saw a preview of logging supplier payments and unclaimed bookings. So being able to really reconcile fully a supplier level check, for example. There's also things that we still need to close the gap on collaboration wise. So being able to collaborate around tasks, around contacts, and those things will also benefit all advisors, but we know they're of the utmost importance when working within an agency. Um, so those agency features are really key, and we're going to be spending August making sure we're kind of checking the boxes on the most critical agency features. We won't be done at the end of August, but we'll really try to close out the biggest gaps for people switching over and being able to effectively use Tern. Um, on the other kind of half, there are some really important things for all advisors that we're working on. So hopefully next week we should be able to spend a lot of the podcast in my weekly product update talking about flight status updates. We know when we talk to advisors about things they use in other systems that may make them not like Tern as much or feel like they can't fully move over to Tern, flight status updates is one of those really big ones. And so, hopefully, we'll be able to show you that really soon. And we're excited about how that's coming together. And then advisor level reporting and commission tracking. So if you've been kind of catching our updates and the agency webinar and some of my product updates, you might have seen the agency level commission and reporting dashboards. But we're making that available to everybody. So as an advisor, you can see across all of my trips, what is my commission? What is the status of, either getting paid from my host agency or from the supplier directly if I'm an agency of one. And then just being able to see kind of like my sales reporting and projections and how much commission I expect over the next year. So all of that stuff we're making available to advisors and to agents working within agencies using Tern. So that'll be really exciting. Um, And then zooming out a little bit more to September, September is the month of groups. We are so excited for group travel. We know that kind of that and flight status updates are kind of the two lingering features that I think if you polled advisors, like 90% of them would be like, those are the two features I need. So we're incredibly excited to start on groups. Brad and I actually spent like 10 hours together this week on groups. We're like deep in planning mode for groups. So I think after Wednesday and Thursday, like I'd only thought about groups and my brain just wouldn't compute anything else. So that'll be really exciting. I think we're going to do a little preview in the webinar coming up in 2 weeks. So that's very exciting. And then November and December, we are hoping that we can really pull up after we've done those critical foundational agency features, advisor features, and take time to go back to some of those things and really make sure they're, some of these things are a little bit kind of the smallest possible version of what will add value, but we know there's a bunch of other things people want. Like forms is a great example. More customization within the form elements. There's just a bunch of other features people want in forms. And so being able to go kind of feature by feature and look at what are the top areas of feedback and how do we add those gaps, address the biggest pain points, and just make the overall polish and look and feel a lot better. So we'll still be adding net new features, but we're hoping November and December is really more in that mode of kind of going back and polishing and improving.
The feedback tool Canny is going to be our best friend in
Yes,
November and December. Just like, what are those things people are are
a
really
million percent.
excited about? Yeah, would be cool.
So another plug. If you haven't been in the feedback tool, like go upvote, like put comments in there, share as much context as you can. As you've heard, like we're in it all the time, right? I get like literally a daily summary of like here's everything that's happened in Canny, and it's like so fun just to see and kind of build that pattern recognition. And I'm um, I'm just I think excited about everything. I was gonna say I'm really excited. I'm like, so stoked for groups. Like it was fun last night. Literally, I was like kind of checking up an email and Slack and stuff. And I saw the like push notification test screenshots going out, and it's like kind of funny. We'll share more next week. But one of our engineers, like in our test documentation, that calls out one specific engineer that all the other engineers have been spamming with push notifications to test this. And so that was funny to see. But it's like really that's going to be cool. Groups tune in on August 7th, another plug. Like it's going to blow your mind, just the preview, and then will blow your mind even more when it starts to ship. Maybe Molly, question on groups. You kind of talked a little bit earlier when we were talking about e-signatures and splitting out kind of like the form actual development with the PDF. Like I know it's maybe too early to say exactly how we'll structure it, but like high level, do you think that like groups is one big release? Do you think it's several mini releases? Like what is your kind of crystal ball telling you with that?
Oh, it's not going to be one big release that we spend like 3 months on and we don't release. No, and we are still working on the exact sequencing, but high level, how we're thinking about it is there's some foundational pieces to better structure group trips that we know all of our existing advisors, even trying to do things for like groups of 5 people, really struggle with. So, like, all 5 of those people seeing everybody's flights, seeing all of the credit card authorizations for all of the items, even though, only one person is paying for this thing or they're splitting payments. So like the kind of re-architecture or new architecture to support the group style trips versus the trips where everyone should really see everything and maybe just there's one person paying for the whole trip. We're thinking about that as kind of the first piece of this project, where if we release that, it will go such a long way for just everyone who's already using Tern and kind of struggling with some of those things. Insurance is another big one where we know that everyone needs insurance, not just like a single insurance object or policy on the trip. And then phase 2, how we're thinking about it, is starting to really support the things you need for scale. So the self-service sign up for a group trip, the landing pages, a bunch of things like that, being able to in a more structured way collect flight data and traveler preferences and export those things to work with suppliers. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, Brad. Feel free to jump in. But inventory management. Yep, that's a big one for working at scale. So being able to say, this type of room has 10 available, and then as people book, it actually goes to 9 and then 8. So the phase two is really about scale. And by the way, each of those things we can ship separately. So like self-service sign up, that'll add immediate value. Then layering on inventory management, that so that's how we'll think about releasing these things. And then of course we can't forget things like direct payments and trip funds and things like support for net. We're working really closely with agencies and Path to understand their needs there. So there's a lot to work through, and also just on the financial infrastructure side to supporting some of those things like a client directly paying through Tern into the agent, the advisor bank account. So that'll we're thinking about that as like the last phase of work, where there's just a lot more planning involved, but we know that a lot of people will need those things.
And maybe kind of closing thought there is our webinar strategy, right? Which is we think about as like the big product launches are like a little bit different than our product strategy. The product strategy is like ship immediately and like learn quickly and iterate. And like our webinar strategy is like once we feel like I'll call it like 80% of the features are done and that most people will be able to use this kind of end to end and get value from it, that's when we actually start to do webinars. So when we talk about groups launching or having a groups webinar, let's say like late October, we're thinking many of those projects have already shipped, right? And so like stay tuned even as early as like probably mid to late September for some of these like little pieces starting to trickle into the product, showing up in Molly's product updates. And then the big launch will be probably later this fall. So exact dates and all those things to come. But we are, there's so much to talk about in this episode. And we've like, I think made great progress. Let us know in the comments what you think. But we're going to round out with our, what are you excited for in the next couple of weeks? And Brad, I'll start with you.
Oh, you expanded to a couple weeks, and now I get to say the webinar on this episode. This is, I'm just really excited about the webinar. I also realized yesterday that I'm going to be calling in from a tiny little cottage in Maine. So just excited to be living the dream in the middle of nowhere in Maine while also talking about incredible product that we're shipping. It's going to be a good
Love
time.
it.
Excited to see what's there.
Well, let me know if you need to borrow Starlink, that's, I got you.
Yeah, surprisingly, there's great internet on this island.
Wow. Okay.
Good.
That is a surprise. Molly, how about you?
I'm excited to sign myself up for 500 different delayed flights and get just spammed with push notifications and just like compare them against what's actually happening and go into like deep testing mode for flight status updates.
Yeah. It's it would have been actually a perfect week if we were like 5 days earlier with the CrowdStrike outage and my
I
brother and his
know.
kids
I was
were
thinking,
supposed they were supposed to be at this reunion that I'm at right now and they're from Atlanta. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it because they just couldn't get out of Atlanta. And
oh,
it's like shout out to if anybody has people trying to travel on Delta over the past week, like thoughts are with you. But it would have been the only silver lining I can imagine is it would have made testing the flight status updates a lot easier because you're looking for a delayed flight. Just put in anything flying out of ATL on Delta, and it's there. It is like you're going to get a lot of updates. But um, anyway, I think I'm excited to be home. I've been gone for like working kind of from all these different random places for the past 10 days. And so like I'm excited to be back at the home office, back in the routine, and working on all the things ahead of the webinar, we're going to be we're going to be in Las Vegas for Virtuoso Travel Week. And so like getting meetings set up there. So if you're listening to this and you'll be there, let us know. We'd love to get a coffee with you. So just excited to be back in the routine and all the incredible things that we've got lined up for August. So that wraps up the podcast. Thank you for listening. Again, plug for the August 7th webinar, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Tons of cool stuff that'll be launching. And if you haven't already, go ahead and click the like button. This is a new podcast that helps us kind of get the word out on that. And if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you push the subscribe button. We will see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
You're a pro, Dave.